The prairie stretched endlessly beneath a sky painted in fading gold, the kind of sky that seemed to hold secrets of 1,000 untold stories. And in the middle of that vast loneliness stood a weather-beaten cabin where she lived, a woman whose name had been whispered only in passing at the mercantile, whose face the townsfolk described as gentle but sad. For though her hands were calloused from hard work and her spirit hardened by solitude, her heart had never once been touched by the tenderness of love, never kissed, never held, and never told she was beautiful in a way that meant more than courtesy. And every evening she would sit on the porch, watching the horizon as though waiting for something or someone that might change the rhythm of her days, though she never dared believe it would happen. Then one dusk, as the cicadas sang and the wind carried the scent of dust and distant rain, a lone cowboy rode into her clearing, tall in the saddle with shoulders broad beneath a worn duster, his horse moving with the steady patience of a man who'd traveled far and knew the land's quiet ways. And when he tipped his hat in greeting, his eyes steady, kind, with a glint of mischief hiding in their depths met hers, and something in her chest stirred like a caged bird fluttering. For the first time, he asked for water, and she offered it with trembling hands, unused to the nearness of a stranger, so sure of himself yet gentle in manner. And as the silence stretched between them, broken only by the trickle of water into the bucket and the restless shifting of his horse, he looked at her with a gaze that seemed to strip away the layers of her loneliness. And in that gaze she felt both fear and hope, for though she had lived untouched and unkissed, a quiet ache hidden from the world, here was a man who, without saying much at all, made her feel seen. And she did not yet know that before the moon rose high over the plains, her world would begin to unravel in ways she had never dared to dream. For the cowboy had come with more than dust on his boots. He had come with a promise written in his smile, a promise that whispered of something she had waited her whole life to feel. The days that followed were unlike any she had ever known, for the cowboy did not ride on as most drifters did, but lingered at her homestead with the easy excuse of needing to rest his horse and mend a saddle strap. Yet in truth he stayed because each morning when the sun broke over the plains and lit her face in that tender glow, he found himself unwilling to let the moment go, and she, though shy and uncertain, found her heart unraveling thread by thread in his presence. The quiet loneliness that had been her closest companion now replaced by laughter shared over morning coffee, the warmth of his voice filling the cabin with something alive. And when he told her stories of faraway towns, of shootouts and saloons, of star-filled nights spent by campfires, she listened wide-eyed, her chest aching with the realization of just how small her world had been until now. Yet beneath his rugged charm there was a weight he carried, shadows that crossed his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking, and though she dared not ask, she longed to understand the battles he had fought and the scars hidden behind his smile. But even without words, his presence gave her a courage she had never known, so that when he brushed past her in the kitchen, the back of his hand grazing her arm, or when he leaned too close to point out a constellation in the night sky, her breath caught, her cheeks burned, and her whole being trembled with a yearning so fierce it frightened her. One evening, as the storm winds howled and rain pounded the roof, he found her staring out the window, her eyes distant, and he stepped close, his voice low as thunder as he said, she deserved more than loneliness, more than waiting for a world that never came to her door. And though she tried to laugh it away, insisting that women like her were not the ones cowboys remembered, his hand found hers, rough and steady, and the silence that followed carried a weight that neither could ignore. He leaned in slightly, his lips close enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath, and whispered that no soul should live unkissed, no heart unloved. And though she trembled with both fear and longing, she pulled back at the last second, whispering that she was not ready, and he, with a soft smile that held both patience and promise, tilted his hat and told her gently, "When you are ready, I'll fix that, and I'll show you real love, not the kind that vanishes like dust in the wind." And those words stayed with her through the storm, echoing louder than the thunder, burning in her chest like the first spark of a fire she could not put out. The peace of her small homestead shattered one late afternoon when the sound of horses thundered in the distance, not the steady rhythm of a lone rider but the reckless pounding of many hooves, and the cowboy, who had been fixing a broken fence post, stiffened like a wolf catching the scent of hunters, his hand drifting to the revolver at his hip as he told her to get inside, his voice calm but edged with steel. Before she could even ask what was wrong, 3 men came into view, rough-faced drifters with eyes that glittered like blades and laughter that carried cruelty, their guns flashing, as they shouted demands for food, money, and whatever else they fancied. And she, trembling behind the doorframe, realized in that moment just how fragile her little world was, how quickly loneliness could turn into danger. But the cowboy stood tall, shoulders squared, his voice firm as he warned them to leave, and though he was outnumbered, there was something in his stance, in the way his thumb hovered near his revolver, that made even desperate men pause. Still, desperation breeds violence, and the first shot cracked the silence, sending her into a scream as splinters flew from the porch railing. But before fear could swallow her whole, the cowboy moved, quick as lightning, his gun barking fire, dropping one of the drifters into the dust while the others scattered for cover, returning fire that sent bullets whizzing past her head until she stumbled back into the cabin. The chaos outside seemed endless, yet through it all, her thoughts were of him, the man who had brought warmth into her cold world and was now spilling blood to protect it. And when the gunfire finally died and the outlaws rode off in retreat, one wounded and another cursing into the distance, she ran out to find him kneeling, his arm grazed by a bullet, blood streaking his sleeve, but his eyes still fierce, still steady. And when she fell to her knees beside him, her hands fumbling to press against his wound, tears blinding her, he only smiled through the pain and told her softly that she had nothing to fear, as long as he was there. In that instant, with fear and relief crashing over her like storm waves, she could no longer hold back the ache she had buried for so long, and without thinking she leaned forward, pressing her lips to his, trembling with inexperience but pouring every ounce of her longing, her gratitude, her heart into that kiss. And though it was clumsy, though it was soaked with tears, he kissed her back with a gentleness that made her soul tremble, whispering against her lips that this was only the beginning, that he would show her what real love felt like, slow and steady, strong enough to carry both their scars. And as the sun bled into the horizon, painting the land in fire, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The kiss had awakened something in her, a fire she had never known, but love on the frontier was never left in peace. And as days passed, word of the shootout spread, whispers of vengeance following the cowboy wherever he rode. For the men he had sent fleeing were part of a larger gang, a pack of wolves who would not let their pride bleed into the dirt without answering in kind. And though he warned her that trouble would come, he never once considered leaving. For in her eyes he had found a reason to stop drifting, a reason to fight for something more than survival. Yet she feared that the very love she had just discovered might be ripped away before it had a chance to bloom. One evening, as the sun sank low and shadows stretched long across the prairie, the gang returned. 6 riders thundering into her clearing with rifles raised, their leaders sneering that they had come not only for the cowboy's life, but to burn the place she called home, to leave nothing behind but ashes. And for a heartbeat she thought she would break under the weight of terror. But then the cowboy stepped forward, blood still stiff on his shirt from the wound he had yet to fully heal, his stance steady, his voice calm as he told them that if they wanted destruction, they would have to go through him. And when their laughter turned into gunfire, the night blazed once more with violence. Bullets shattered windows, horses screamed, and she, hiding behind the doorframe, could only watch as the man who had taught her the meaning of love fought like a storm unleashed, his revolvers spitting fire until the dust was thick with smoke, and men lay groaning in the dirt, the gang finally breaking under the weight of his fury and scattering into the darkness. Silence followed, broken only by the ragged beat of his breath as he lowered his weapons and turned back to her. And in that moment, seeing him bloodied but unbroken, standing not as a drifter, but as a man who had chosen her above all else, she ran into his arms, her tears mixing with the dust on his skin as she whispered that she would never again doubt she was worthy of love, for he had risked everything to prove it. He tilted her chin, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was no longer trembling or clumsy but strong and certain.